No, don't go in there!
Stop! The scream echoed through the marble hallway just as a tiny girl slipped past two stunned housekeepers and pushed open the only door in the mansion everyone had been warned never to touch. No, sweetheart, don't go in there, a woman cried, dropping the basket of fresh towels she had been carrying. The child ignored every voice behind her. She walked straight into the enormous bedroom where Adrian Sterling sat motionless beside a floor-to-ceiling window, staring at a gray sky that hadn't seen sunlight in days. He didn't turn around when the door opened. Visitors never came without permission, and the only people allowed inside usually carried medicine, paperwork, or bad news. The little girl stopped only a few feet away from him. She tilted her head. Then, in a voice so innocent it silenced the entire room, she asked, "Why does your house sound like everyone's afraid of you?" No one breathed. The staff who had rushed into the doorway froze, waiting for the explosion they were certain would come. Adrian slowly turned his head. His tired blue eyes met hers for the first time. And for reasons nobody in that room could understand, the billionaire who hadn't spoken more than a handful of words in nearly 2 weeks simply stared at the child as though she'd asked the only honest question he'd heard in years. Outside the room, Elena Morales felt her heart stop. She pushed through the crowd, grabbed her daughter by the shoulders, and pulled her back. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, her voice shaking. "Please. I'm so sorry. She wasn't supposed to leave the staff room. I'll take her home. It won't happen again." No answer. The silence stretched so long it became unbearable. Every employee in the hallway knew what came next. Elena would lose her job. Security would escort her out. That was how things worked in Adrian Sterling's house. Rules weren't bent. Mistakes weren't forgiven. Especially not by the man whose name had built one of the largest technology companies in America. Finally, Adrian spoke. His voice was rough from disuse. "What's your name?" Everyone looked at one another. Surely he wasn't talking to the little girl. She answered before anyone else could. "My name's Sophia." "And how old are you?" She proudly held up 4 fingers. "I'm this many." For the first time in weeks, something almost invisible crossed Adrian's face. Not quite a smile, but close enough that every employee noticed. Elena swallowed hard. "Sir, please forgive us." Instead of looking at her, Adrian kept his eyes on Sophia. "You asked why everyone sounds afraid." She nodded. "They whisper." "They do." "Why?" No one had ever dared ask him that. He looked toward the doorway where every member of his household staff stood perfectly still, avoiding eye contact. Then he quietly answered, "Because I told them to." Sophia frowned. "That's silly." A few gasps escaped from the hallway. Elena nearly covered her daughter's mouth. "I'm sorry." But Adrian surprised everyone again. "Why is it silly?" "Because people laugh loud." She shrugged like the answer was obvious. "And houses are supposed to laugh." The room fell silent again. Only this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Adrian looked around the enormous bedroom. The polished wood. The priceless paintings. The designer furniture. The expensive silence. He hadn't realized until that exact moment that he couldn't remember the last time anyone had laughed inside those walls. "Take her back," he finally said. Elena nodded repeatedly. "Yes, sir." As she hurried Sophia toward the door, the little girl looked over her shoulder. "Bye, Mr. Lonely." The words hit the room like thunder. Several employees closed their eyes. Someone muttered, "Oh no." But Adrian didn't react with anger. He simply watched the child disappear into the hallway. The door closed. And for the first time in months, the silence felt heavier than before. Hours earlier, none of this had seemed possible. That morning had begun like every other morning inside Sterling Manor. At precisely 7 o'clock, the curtains opened automatically. At 7:10, Adrian's medication arrived. At 7:30, his physical therapist encouraged movements that grew more difficult every week. At 8, Breakfast sat untouched on the tray beside him. Every day followed the same script. Every day ended exactly the same. Adrian watched the world continue without him. 3 years earlier, he'd been standing beneath flashing cameras announcing the launch of a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform that investors claimed would reshape entire industries. Reporters fought for interviews. Entrepreneurs begged for meetings. Headlines called him the youngest visionary of his generation. Back then, he could command a room with a single sentence. But some mornings he struggled to button his own shirt. It had started with something so small no one took it seriously. His hand shook while signing contracts. He laughed it off. Too much coffee. Weeks later, he dropped a glass during an interview. Months later, climbing stairs became exhausting. Doctors ordered test after test. Specialists flew in from different cities. Each appointment ended with another question, until one neurologist quietly placed a folder on the desk. "I'm afraid the results are clear." The diagnosis didn't simply change his future. It erased it. The disease would slowly steal movement. Then independence. There was treatment. There was therapy. There was hope of slowing it. There was no cure. Adrian left the hospital through a private exit so photographers wouldn't see him. Within 6 months, rumors began spreading. Within a year, shareholders questioned whether he should remain CEO. By the second year, board members spoke about succession plans while pretending they weren't. His assistant resigned. His closest business partner accepted another position. Even people who claimed they loved him began saying things like, "You need to focus on resting. I don't want you to push yourself. We'll handle everything." It sounded compassionate, but every sentence pushed him farther from the life he'd built. Eventually, he stopped fighting for his place. He resigned, sold part of the company, retreated into Sterling Manor overlooking the cliffs above the Pacific. The mansion became his world, and then his prison. He wrote only one instruction for every employee before moving in. No unnecessary conversations. The staff obeyed. Meals arrived quietly. Medicine arrived quietly. Rooms were cleaned quietly. Even birthdays passed quietly. Nobody asked how he felt. Nobody spoke unless spoken to. At first, Adrian believed distance would hurt less. If nobody became close, nobody could disappoint him. But loneliness had a strange way of growing louder inside silence. Every hallway echoed with everything he'd lost. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the city, Elena Morales was fighting a completely different battle. Her apartment was barely large enough for 2 people, but every corner held evidence of love. Crayon drawings covered the refrigerator. Tiny shoes waited beside the door. A chipped ceramic mug displayed the words "World's Best Mom," even though the paint had faded years ago. She laughed when she saw it every morning. Not because life was easy, because Sophia believed it. That belief kept her going. Working at Sterling Manor paid better than cleaning offices downtown, but every dollar already had somewhere to go before she earned it. Groceries, medicine for her aging mother, preschool tuition. There was never enough left. Still, she never complained. Until the phone rang that Tuesday morning. The voice on the other end apologized repeatedly. "There was a burst pipe overnight. The preschool will be closed for at least 2 days." Elena looked at the clock. Her shift started in less than an hour. "I don't have anyone else." "I'm sorry." She called neighbors. No answer. Friends. Working. Her mother. At a doctor's appointment across town. She stared at Sophia, who was happily coloring a picture of a butterfly, completely unaware that one phone call had just put their entire future at risk. Elena whispered to herself, "What am I supposed to do now?" An hour later, she made the most dangerous decision of her life. And before the day was over, someone else inside Sterling Manor would make an even more unexpected one. Elena kept glancing at the rearview mirror as she drove towards Sterling Manor. Sophia sat in the back seat humming to herself, holding the stuffed rabbit she refused to leave home without. "You have to promise Mommy something," Elena said. trying to keep the panic out of her voice. I promise. You don't even know what I'm going to ask. Sophia smiled. I'll still promise. Elena almost laughed, but the fear was stronger. When we get there, you'll stay in the staff room. You won't explore. You won't touch anything. And no matter what happens, you stay where I leave you. Can you do that? I can. You really mean it? I really mean it. The promise lasted exactly 11 minutes. After Adrian had told Elena to take Sophia away, the rest of the day unfolded in a way no one inside the mansion could explain. Normally, Adrian would have asked to be left alone. Instead, he sat staring at the closed bedroom door. He wasn't thinking about business. He wasn't thinking about doctors. He wasn't even thinking about the disease that had become his unwanted companion. He kept hearing one sentence. Houses are supposed to laugh. The words sounded childish, ridiculously simple, yet they refused to leave his mind. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His butler, Charles, stepped inside. You asked to see me, sir? Adrian nodded slowly. That housekeeper. Ms. Morales? How long has she worked here? Almost 5 years. And today was the first time she's broken a rule? Charles blinked. Yes, sir. Has she ever asked for special treatment? No. Ever been late? No. Complained? Never. Adrian looked back toward the window. So today wasn't carelessness. Charles hesitated. No, sir. It was desperation. The older man remained silent. Adrian finally asked the question no one expected. How much do we pay her? Charles looked surprised. I'd have to check payroll. Check. That afternoon, while polishing the library shelves, Elena couldn't stop replaying the morning in her mind. Every sound made her jump. Every approaching footstep felt like the one that would end her employment. The mansion's housekeeper supervisor walked toward her. Mr. Sterling wants your file. Her stomach dropped. Of course he did. I'm sorry, Elena whispered. I know. She expected security to arrive at any moment. Nothing happened. Hours passed. No meeting. No dismissal. No angry letter from Human Resources. It made even less sense. Across the mansion, Adrian found himself doing something he hadn't done in months. He wandered. Slowly. Painfully. With the help of a polished walnut cane. Every hallway reminded him of how enormous the house really was. He'd designed every inch of it years earlier. At the time, he'd imagined hosting charity galas, holiday dinners, friends, family. Most of the rooms remained untouched. The music room hadn't heard a piano in over a year. The theater sat empty. The game room still looked brand new. Millions of dollars had built a monument to a life that no longer existed. As he reached the sunroom, he noticed something lying beneath a chair. A piece of paper, folded unevenly. He bent down with difficulty and picked it up. It was a drawing. A giant yellow sun. A crooked tree. A little girl. A tall man with messy blue lines around his legs. Above both figures, written in oversized letters only a child could manage, were the words, "You look happy here." He stared at it for a long time. Then quietly asked the nearest employee, "Who left this?" The young maid swallowed nervously. I think Sophia dropped it when her mother took her home. Adrian folded the picture carefully. Don't throw it away. That evening, something happened that shocked the kitchen staff. For the first time in weeks, Adrian finished his dinner. Not all of it, but enough that the chef asked 3 different people if someone had mistaken the trays. The next morning, Elena arrived convinced she was walking into her final shift. She had already prepared what she would say. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Before she could clock in, Charles approached. Mr. Sterling would like a word. Her knees nearly buckled. She followed him upstairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. Charles opened Adrian's bedroom door. He'll see you now. She walked inside. Adrian sat by the window again. The child's drawing rested on the table beside him. I'm sorry, Elena began immediately. There isn't an excuse. I should have called in. I should have. He interrupted gently. Why didn't you? She stopped. What? Call in. She looked down at the floor. Because missing 1 week's pay means missing rent. Silence. My daughter eats before I do most weeks. Another silence. I couldn't lose this job. Adrian looked at her for several seconds. Then he asked something no employer had ever asked. Are things really that difficult? Elena gave a tired smile. Sir, the difficult stopped surprising me a long time ago. She expected pity. He nodded as though he understood. You may go. She frowned. That's it. For now. She left more confused than before. The following afternoon, another surprise arrived. Charles found Elena in the laundry room. Mr. Sterling has another request. She closed her eyes. Yes. He wants to know. Charles almost smiled. Whether Sophia likes nature documentaries. Elena blinked. I'm sorry. He specifically asked about whales. She stared at him. I don't understand. Neither do I. When Elena arrived home that evening, Sophia was coloring at the kitchen table. Guess what Mr. Lonely asked today? Sophia looked up. He smiled. Elena paused. How did you know? I think he forgot how before. The next morning, Adrian did something no one expected. He instructed Charles to invite Elena and Sophia to the sunroom during his afternoon tea. Every employee wondered if this was finally the confrontation. Sophia walked in carrying 3 crayons. She climbed into the oversized chair across from Adrian as though visiting an old friend. I brought colors. What for? So you can draw too. I don't know how. She giggled. Everybody knows how. No. You just forgot. Adrian looked at the blank sheet she slid across the table. He hadn't drawn anything since elementary school. I'll make a whale, she declared proudly. You like whales? They sing. So if whales can sing underwater. She leaned closer. Maybe people can smile even when they're sad. Adrian couldn't explain why those words landed so heavily. Children weren't supposed to understand grief. Yet somehow, she seemed to understand loneliness better than most adults. The afternoon stretched into an hour. Then another. They watched dolphins leap across a documentary on the television. Sophia clapped every time one jumped. When the program ended, Adrian realized something startling. He hadn't checked the clock once. For months, he'd counted every minute. Time had simply passed. The staff noticed the change too. The nurses found him sitting straighter. The chef heard him thank someone. The gardener watched him spend 20 minutes outside on the terrace instead of 5. Tiny changes. Almost invisible. But they spread through the mansion like sunlight after a storm. Employees who had spent years avoiding conversation began speaking to one another again. The chef baked cinnamon cookies simply because Sophia liked the smell. The gardener planted bright yellow flowers after hearing they were her favorite. Even Charles, who had served the Sterling family for nearly 3 decades without ever missing a day, found himself smiling more often. The mansion didn't feel as silent anymore. It felt awake. If this story has you wondering whether one small act of kindness can truly change a person's life, let everyone know in the comments. Sometimes the smallest voices make the biggest difference, and it's always fascinating to hear what others think they would have done. But not everyone welcomed the change. Late one evening, as Adrian prepared for bed, 2 members of the company's executive board requested an urgent private meeting. They weren't there to ask how he was feeling. They had discovered something that made them deeply uncomfortable. And what they said next threatened to destroy everything that had just begun. The board members didn't wait to be invited to sit down. Victor Lang, the company's chief financial officer for nearly 12 years, placed a thick folder on Adrian's desk. We need to discuss what's been happening. Adrian looked from the folder to Victor without saying a word. Beside him sat Denise Harper, the company's legal advisor. She folded her hands tightly in her lap. This isn't personal, she said carefully. It's about protecting your legacy. Adrian almost smiled. People usually say that right before making something personal. Victor slid several photographs across the desk. They showed Adrian laughing, watching documentaries, looking at children's drawings, walking through the gardens beside Sophia. We've received questions from investors, Victor said. Some people believe you're becoming emotionally vulnerable. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Emotionally vulnerable? They're concerned someone may be manipulating you. He looked at the photographs again. There was Sophia holding up a drawing of a blue whale. Another of Elena helping him down a garden path. One showed all three of them laughing at something outside the frame. They think a housekeeper and her daughter are getting too close. Victor leaned forward. We're recommending that contact ends immediately. Silence filled the room. Denise spoke softly. If you're planning to make financial decisions involving them, people will question your judgment. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked something unexpected. Have either of you ever eaten dinner alone every night for 6 months? Neither spoke. Have you ever watched people avoid looking at you because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing? Still silence. Have you ever wondered whether the disease was killing you? He paused. Or whether loneliness was simply getting there first? Victor looked uncomfortable. This isn't about feelings. No. Adrian nodded slowly. It never has been. He closed the folder. The meeting is over. Victor frowned. I don't think you understand how serious this is. Adrian looked directly into his eyes. I understand perfectly. The two executives left frustrated. But Adrian remained seated long after the door closed. For the first time in years, he realized he'd spent far too much of his life listening to people who understood profit better than people. The following morning, he called Charles into the study. I need every employee here at noon. Charles looked surprised. Everyone, sir? Everyone. By lunchtime, the household staff gathered nervously in the grand ballroom. Some whispered about layoffs. Others wondered whether the mansion would be sold. Elena stood near the back, holding Sophia's hand. Her stomach twisted with anxiety. When Adrian entered, the room fell completely silent. Walking still required his cane. Every step was slow, painful, but there was something different about the way he carried himself. He no longer looked like a man waiting for life to end. He looked like someone who had finally remembered how to live. He stopped in front of his employees. For years, he began, I believed professionalism meant distance. His voice echoed through the ballroom. I thought if nobody cared about me, nobody could hurt me. He looked around the room. I was wrong. No one moved. I built this house to impress people. He glanced toward the towering windows. It impressed everyone. Another pause. It welcomed no one. Several employees lowered their eyes. I asked you to become invisible. His voice softened. And you obeyed. He turned toward Charles. You've worked for my family almost 30 years. Charles nodded. I don't know the names of your grandchildren. The older man's eyes filled with tears. Adrian looked toward the chef. I know your meals. He smiled sadly. I never asked whether someone was waiting for you at home. Then he looked at Elena. You carried burdens I never noticed. She immediately shook her head. Sir, you don't owe me. I do. He reached into his jacket and unfolded several envelopes. The first is for you. She accepted it with trembling hands. Inside was a new employment contract. Permanent position. A salary nearly twice her current income. Comprehensive health insurance. Flexible hours. Paid childcare. An annual education allowance. She stared at the page in disbelief. There must be a mistake. There isn't. Tears rolled down her face. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay. She nodded before he even finished speaking. I will. I promise. The room erupted into applause. But Adrian wasn't finished. He looked toward Sophia. Would you come here? She walked confidently across the ballroom with her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm. You look happier. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. I am. He knelt carefully despite the pain, bringing himself to her eye level. I have something for you. He handed her a small wooden box. She opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter and a tiny silver compass. She looked up. I can't read all the big words. Her mother gently unfolded the letter. As she read, her hand flew to her mouth. The letter promised that every year of Sophia's education, from elementary school to university, had already been funded through a trust created in her name. Tuition, housing, everything. Elena could barely breathe. No. She looked at Adrian through tears. You can't. I already did. It's too much. He shook his head. No. He smiled at Sophia. It's an investment. The little girl looked confused. In what? In the person you'll become. Sophia hugged him without asking permission. The room stood frozen. No one had touched Adrian in years except doctors and therapists. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes. It felt normal, human. Then he stood again. There's one more announcement. The room grew quiet. I recently sold my vacation estate in Aspen. Several employees exchanged confused looks. The proceeds won't be funding another business. He looked directly at Elena. They'll build a non-profit childcare and family resource center. People stared. So no parent has to choose between earning a paycheck and keeping their child safe. Silence. Then applause erupted louder than before. Months passed. Construction crews transformed an abandoned community building into a bright, welcoming center filled with classrooms, books, playgrounds, and hope. Parents who had once faced impossible choices now dropped off their children knowing they were safe. Single mothers found support. Working fathers found relief. Hundreds of families benefited from a decision inspired by one little girl who had wandered through the wrong door. Winter arrived. Snow dusted the gardens surrounding Sterling Manor. Inside, nothing felt the same. The music room finally heard someone playing the piano. The kitchen filled with laughter every Friday afternoon when Sophia insisted everyone decorate cookies together. The gardener proudly showed children how to plant flowers. Charles finally brought his grandchildren to visit. Their laughter echoed through hallways that had once sounded like empty museums. Adrian's illness never disappeared. Some mornings he still struggled to stand. Some afternoons pain forced him back into bed. The disease continued its slow march. But loneliness no longer walked beside it. One evening, just before Christmas dinner, Adrian sat beside the fireplace watching snow drift past the windows. Sophia climbed onto the chair beside him. She studied his face the same way she had on the first day they met. Can I ask you something? You always do. She smiled. Are you still Mr. Lonely? He looked around the room. Employees weren't whispering anymore. They were laughing. The chef was arguing playfully with Charles over the right amount of cinnamon in the cookies. Elena was helping decorate the Christmas tree. Children raced through the hallway wearing paper crowns they'd made that afternoon. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't lonely. He looked back at Sophia. No. What are you now? He smiled, and this time there was nothing forced about it. I'm home. Sophia leaned against his shoulder. I knew your house could laugh. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, warmth finally had an address. Sometimes people spend their whole lives believing that healing only comes from medicine, money, or miracles. But sometimes it begins with one honest question, one small act of kindness, or one child brave enough to walk through an open door. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more unforgettable stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell everyone what moment stayed with you the most, because someone reading your words might need that reminder today that even the smallest act of compassion can completely change another person's life.